So, like I said, today we are going to look at the secrets of giving a great presentation. I've got 3 top tips for you, and each of those tips have some nice little sort of subsection points which I encourage you to make a note of. So if you've got a pen and paper, please make some notes as you go, but hopefully it'll all become clear. It'll all become clear. Okay, now, tip number 1. Look, this will sound like it's obvious, right? But knowing your subject is really the key to giving a great presentation. Now, I've got some details around this, okay? So not only will knowing your subject help you with your nerves around you sort of giving a good presentation, but also it allows you to sort of distill things down and keep things simple in the way in which you give your presentation. So you'll notice today I've given 3 nice clear tips, if you like. I mean, I could talk for a hell of a long time about presentation skills, but these are the 3 that I think will help the majority of my listeners. And that's my second part of this, is that, let's think about your audience. Make sure that you pitch your presentation to your audience. I'd also encourage you not to be salesy in terms of the way in which you approach things. Some people might say that me having me logo on you and, call me, WhatsApp me, whatever you want to do, may seem quite salesy. I'm not trying to be pushy with it at all. If you want to get in touch with me, absolutely. But the whole point of me being here today is to try and share some knowledge, be more of an educator and a sharer rather than being a salesperson. So knowing your audience and knowing your subject will give you that sort of air of confidence. Here are some sort of tips for you. If you are recording this, if you're recording your presentation, let's say it's a webinar or it's a YouTube video, don't stop, okay? When you're pre-recording something, there's a big temptation to sort of you fumble your words and you stop and then you start again. Push on through it for 2 reasons. Firstly, you can go back within the edit, and with the editing software available these days, you can chop those mistakes or blunders or whatever you want to call them, bloopers, out. But also, knowing that you can't stop really does give you a solid foundation for live presentations. Like we're live today on LinkedIn. There's no do-overs. I can't go back and start again and say, oh, I'd like, look, can we just start again? So try wherever possible just to keep on going. It will really help you with the way in which you deliver things. The way in which I pull together presentations is like this. I write things out long form. So whatever your subject matter is, sit down with a pen and paper or on your keyboard and write it out as if you're going to speak it. Then, once you've done the long form bit, look at it and pull out the key bullet points. Because in terms of using an auto cue, that kind of stuff, I'd leave that to the TV presenters, quite frankly. You want to come across as naturally as possible. So today I'm using the, my graphics to prompt me in terms of what I'm talking about. But below I've got some key bullet points just to make sure it keeps me on track. And that's the way in which I would sort of look to structure things in order, to have the flow. Not, you might think that an auto cue is an easy thing to use. It actually isn't. The words scroll, they don't stop scrolling, and sometimes you can get a little bit lost with auto cue. So I'd urge you, write it long form, chunk it down into some nice easy bullet points to keep you on track. The main thing here is about being confident in the way in which you deliver things, and knowing your subject will allow you to do that. When things happen, we've seen today, stuff does happen, right? If you know your subject, then you're far more likely to be able to sort of handle the things that life throws at you. The last thing I'm going to leave you with here is about being authentic. Just be yourself. You don't have to apologize for yourself. If you know your subject, just deliver it in a way that feels right for you. If you deliver things in an authentic way, then you're bound to get some engagement from your audience. And lastly, to back this up, I'm just going to say to you, trust yourself. Okay, if you know your shit, I nearly called this slide that, know your shit. If you know your shit, then be confident and trust yourself that you're going to be able to deliver it. Okay, there we go. Tip number 2. Practice, practice, practice. I could have filled this whole slide by saying practice, 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 practice. You cannot practice enough. Okay, I can't stress how much you need to rehearse and you need to hone your skills and refine what it is that you're going to present. You know, I've run through this not only in long form with bullet points. I ran through it on the weekend. I ran through it this morning a number of times. And here are my tips in terms of practice. Always set a timer. Okay, so this is a couple of minutes out, but I set a timer, and in my practice, I set a timer. Okay, so that I know how long it's taking me to deliver things. A lot of the time when you start talking, in a blink of an eye, you know, your time's up and you haven't really got your point across. So it's really important to time your practices. The second sub point of practicing is make sure that you practice out loud. Like, I know that sounds strange, but just going over it in your head is not the same as speaking it. We tend to rush things in our head when we read them through, and it can be a lot quicker than you actually think it's going to be. So that's my tip there, is to really make sure that you vocalize it and speak it. And by speaking it, you can actually think about the intonation and how you get your points across. And this brings me on to my next point, which is about not filling all of the silence, okay? And making sure that you don't rush the way in which you deliver things. Now, especially around your key points, so the point here being practice, 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 when you're trying to deliver a message, make sure that you allow it to breathe. Now, I just took a breath there and paused. And in my mind, it seemed like it was about an hour, but it was like less than a second. So maybe recording yourself as you deliver these things, certainly listening to how you deliver your practice speeches will give you a lot of knowledge, I suppose, in how you come across and how you want to tailor things. Now, nerves, I get nervous every single time I do this, and the only way really to overcome my nerves is tip number 1, know my shit, and tip number 2, practice, practice, practice. That's the only way I'm going to overcome the nervousness that I get every single time I have to present or go live, right? Here's a nice one for you, right? When we went live, you might have noticed, you may not have, but maybe you rewind the, go back and watch the playback. But when we went live, the moment that I came on screen, I was smiling. And I would say to you, in terms of the way in which you introduce your webinar or your live or your YouTube, or you going on stage to present, is to hold a smile for like 5-10 seconds before you go live, right? So like an idiot, I was watching the clock tick down and I was like this. And then I pressed the button and said, hi, welcome to the live. The difference being that if you don't hold that smile, so firstly, holding the smile will give you a little bit of energy. But secondly, if I introduced it like this, hi. I don't know, there's something sort of slightly disingenuous about it. So yeah, I don't want to overlay with this point, but try and hold a smile before you go live or walk out on stage. Practice, practice, practice. Think about your hands. Think about your hands and what you do with them. I'm very sort of vocal with my hands, right? I sort of annotate and move them around. I try and clasp them together as much as I can. People don't like hands moving around the screen. It's very, very, very distracting. So try and keep your hands under control. And the only way you can do this is about practicing, right? Practice, record yourself, practice, practice, practice. And if I'm to leave you with one key takeaway from this tip, it's practice. Oh dear, hey, we have some fun. Now, number 3, telling a story. So in terms of how to build your presentation or your speech or whatever it is you're trying to get across, try and tell a story wherever possible. And think about the structure of your presentation in terms of the way in which we've all grown up enjoying stories. And that's them having a beginning, a middle, and an end. Okay, think about a nice sort of introduction. Think about the meat of the presentation, the big key points that you want to get across in your education, and then think about some kind of summary. So a beginning, a middle, and an end. Any calls to action, try and leave them until the end. But in situations like this, where you're doing a live webinar, try and remind your audience that if you've got any questions, please pop them in the chat, because I will have time for questions at the end. See what I did there? If you're live, think about some kind of interaction. Okay, think about being memorable in that kind of way. So I don't mean live as in this, because at the moment I'm talking to a computer screen and I can't hear or see you all, right? But if you're live in the flesh and you've got an audience in front of you, try and get some interaction there. Maybe in a question time style, plant some questions in the audience. You know, any questions? Yes, John. And he's got his pre-worked out question for you, which you're then prepared to answer. There's nothing disingenuous about that. It's part of the show. Maybe look at some kind of audience participation. Maybe in what you're going to do, there'll be some key points. And at the beginning, perhaps ask a few audience members to remember certain things, you know, or Janice, please remember purple today. And Terry, please remember the number 72. We'll come back to you later. All right. It just adds a little bit of an extra dynamic, and your audience start to become invested in what you say. Now, here's the big, am I going to sort of say this yet? No, I'm not. I'm going to say one thing first, right? I'll lead on to my last point. And it's this, that it doesn't matter if you're networking, as an example, or you're on stage. Telling a story is really, really powerful. Let me tell you a little story and give you a big tip about what not to do when presenting. Drinking coffee is one, right? Because it makes you sweat. And think about what color shirt you wear on stage and what you wear. Maybe you want to wear a jacket if you perspire a lot. Think about that. So yeah, think about drinking too much coffee too close to presenting, because it can make you sweat. But here's the one: drinking alcohol. Now, I have presented a dance show for a number of years. I won't go into all the background of how that came about, but I was tricked. But my job was to stand on stage and introduce all the kids onto the stage. You know, this is the juniors and they're going to be dancing to blah, blah, blah. We're talking about kids, some of them as young as 3 or 4, and they never got ready on time. Okay. So what I found I had to do was I had to introduce them, but I also had to do a lot of ad-libbing and a lot of sort of audience participation. Now, when I first did it, I had a couple of liveners. I was nervous, right? I had a couple of cheeky vodkas before I started. Nothing too wrong about that, right? But I had I had a bottle of Coke with me, and I poured maybe quarter of a bottle, maybe half a bottle. I poured quite a bit of vodka into this Coke, and through the course of the evening, over a few hours, I drank a little bit more. What was wrong with that? Nothing was wrong with that at all. I had a great night. I sort of felt I was quite warmed up by the end of it. But let me tell you, nothing major happened, right? But let me tell you, when I watched the video back, I could see that I was getting slowly more and more pissed, right? And becoming a little bit more sort of annotated and excited about things. Now, this wasn't like a disaster. It all went fine. I'm sort of painting quite a sort of bleak picture. But let me tell you, I haven't drunk since. In terms of going on stage, I'm not going to have like a live there to ease my nerves. I'm going to drink some water, because having a bit more clarity about you, it makes for much better watching and viewing on the back end. All right. So there's another tip for you. Don't drink booze. Don't have a live there before you start. Okay. In terms of telling the story, here's my big sort of takeaway for you today. And it's this. In terms of the way in which you structure your presentation, you should tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them. And then tell them what you told them. Right? Let me repeat that for you. In terms of the structure of your presentation, you should tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them. So if you go back to the beginning of this, you will see that I introduced what I was going to do. I told you that I was going to give you 3 tips, all about the secrets to giving a great presentation. That was my bit of telling you what I was going to do. Well, tell you what I was going to tell you. Then I've told you, I've given you your 3 tips. And now I'm going to tell you what I told you. So it's about that sort of summary. It's about driving your point home. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them what you told them. So let me just do this for you now as we get to the sort of the close of the webinar. The first thing is tip number 1, know your shit, or know your subject, all right? Be on top of it. In terms of your content, write it long form and then chunk it down into bullet points to make sure that you're kept on track. Know your audience, make sure that your delivery is relevant for them, and ultimately be yourself. Tip number 2, practice, 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 practice. You cannot practice enough. Make sure that you time your practices. Make sure that you speak it out loud, even if it's to yourself. And I'm going to say to you, if you suffer with nerves, then a little bit of positive affirmation, look in the mirror. I know it sounds daft. Look in the mirror. Tell yourself, yes, I can do this. Yes, I can do this. All right. Get your energies up. Don't drink. Don't move your hands wildly across the screen. And the big one here is you can never practice too much. Tip number 3, try and tell a story. Try and give it this beginning, a middle, and an end. And then I'm going to register this as a trademark. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them what you told them. Okay? There's your top tips for the secrets of a great presentation.